English translation. 839th contact. Thursday, the 23rd of March, 2023, 8:42, HRS.
Greetings, and here I really am. Yesterday, unfortunately, it was not possible because I was called away. However, I have the whole of the decisions of the panel here, so we can look through it together. It is ordered that everything be inserted verbatim in its entirety as it was given.
Of course, we are not changing anything. However, also be greeted and be welcome.
That's the way it's supposed to be, it is.
Excuse me if I interrupt you right now, but I received something else in the night yesterday that I want to bring up right at the beginning of our conversation, because it is more than just interesting. The whole thing was made public in September last year, but as usual it was concealed by the press, and the world public was not informed about what Zelensky is really doing in Ukraine, and even in the outside world. He has had human beings murdered, or continues to have many of them persecuted and murdered as birdless people, because they dare to speak the truth, or because they are pro-Russia, or have a different attitude towards Putin than he does. Thus he unconscionably acts even against minors and has them persecuted and murdered. Many rulers of the West who are oriented in this regard nevertheless consciencelessly supply weapons and war equipment to Zelensky. This article here talks about that.
We are aware of that, as we also know that, but I am interested in what has been written about this, which is why I like to see what has been uncovered about this evil matter, but which the state leaders are keeping from the public, although they are informed regarding these machinations of Zelensky and those like-minded with him.
Good. Here is the article.
Many journalists and over 300 minors on Ukrainian government's death list.
Since 2014, the Ukrainian government has been operating a website via an intermediary NGO, on which many human beings whom Kiev considers to be opponents of Ukraine are listed with their names and addresses. Many of the human beings listed there have already been murdered.
By Thomas Roper, the 9th of September 2022, 1816 HRS.
In Ukraine, after the Maidan, the NGO center Mirotvorets has been founded and has put the website Mirotvorets Peacemakers online. The NGO calls itself the Center of Research on Signs of Crimes against Ukraine's national security, peace, humanity, and international law, and its site lists human beings whom the NGO has declared to be opponents of Ukraine. These human beings are listed with their personal data, often even with private address, telephone number, passport number, and so on.
The Ukrainian government's death list.
Many of the human beings listed there have been murdered shortly afterwards. This started back in 2014 with the murder of Oles Busina, a Ukrainian journalist critical of the Maidan, who was shot dead in Kiev just 2 days after being listed on the site in April 2014. Journalist Daria Dugina, who was recently murdered in Moscow, had also been added to the list only shortly before her murder. After the death of human beings published on the list, their photo is captioned in red letters with the word liquidated. It is therefore no exaggeration to call the Mirotvorets page a Ukrainian death list. The site is so blatantly supported by the Ukrainian government, namely the Ministry of the Interior and the SBU Secret Service, that one can even read this, at least still in the German Wikipedia. One can therefore justifiably speak of a death list of the Ukrainian government. In Maidan, Ukraine, political murders of government critics have not been uncommon since the Maidan. I have reported on this time and again. German quality media, however, do not find this worth mentioning, although most of the political murders in Ukraine are committed against human beings who have previously been put on the death list. The list includes human beings from a great many countries. Journalists are also put on the list. My name is also there, by the way. There are currently 314 journalists on the list, 80 of them from Western countries, and the addresses of 109 have even been published. It is an invitation to do something to these human beings. Even more shocking, if that is at all possible, is the fact that there are also about 300 minors on the list. Among them is, for example, the 14-year-old girl Faina Savinkova from Lugansk, whose crime is to write open letters to politicians and activists, also to the UN, all over the world, demanding an end to the terrorist shelling of her hometown Lugansk, which the Ukrainian army has been carrying out since 2014 and where Faina grew up.
Western values?
Western governments are of course aware of all this. They are also aware that their own citizens are on the list. Actually, a government's primary goal should be to protect its own citizens. But even after former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder was put on the death list, the German government did not see fit to intervene in Kiev. Instead, at the time, the German government succinctly stated in response to a question, "We have already made our position clear to the Ukrainian side in the past, and we have insisted that the Ukrainian government work towards the deletion of this website. We will also do that now." These were just fine words because nothing happened. Instead of pushing for the deletion of the site, the German government has continued to support the Ukrainian government with billions and now also with weapons. I wonder if the German government would also remain so passive if there were such a death list in Russia. The much-invoked Western values are just empty words with which the stupid public is lulled. In practice, Western governments allow public death lists when it seems politically convenient. The fact that even the murder of children is called for is indifferent to Western governments. Regimes that are obedient to the West are allowed to publicly call for political assassinations in Ukraine, or even bestially murder journalists in their consulates Saudi Arabia, without any consequences.
An issue for the UN.
The Russian NGO Fund for Combating Repression hosted a press conference in Moscow on the 6th of September, where 9 international journalists who are on the Ukrainian death list spoke about this. Since Alina Lip and I are also on this list, we were also invited. In addition, there was a US American, a Canadian, a French woman, a Finn, a Dutch woman, a Briton, and a woman who has 3 citizenships, Ukrainian, Russian, and German. The aim of the press conference was for Mirotvorets to finally be declared a terrorist organization in Russia and for Russia to raise the issue of Mirotvorets at the UN. But of course, Western politicians who supposedly stand for human rights and Western media will also continue to spread the cloak of silence over this and other crimes of the Ukrainian Nazi regime. Please forgive me for not being able to call a government that keeps such a death list, on which I and many of my friends are also listed, anything else. Had the internet existed at the time of the Nazis, I am sure the SS would have run a site similar to what the Ukrainian government does.
Gerhard Schroeder. Roger Waters. Tulsi Gabbard. Faina Savinkova. Thomas Roper.
This corresponds exactly to what we know and have also verified and established, namely that it really does correspond to the facts, although this activity of Zelensky and his like-minded people is kept secret from the Ukrainian people.
It must be so, because nothing else has been reported to me. It is just necessary that everything is revealed publicly instead of just something being alleged. The idiotic sickos of the Western country governments, who are making the people believe the whole of the wrong thing, who are also supplying weapons etc. to Zelensky, paying homage to him and sneaking around the latter, are promoting evil all the more. This, while the stupidly stupid part of the people approves of everything and only picks on Russia and Putin. Of course, Putin is not a saint, but neither is Zelensky. But why can't the idiots of the countries of the West, who are biased in supplying arms to Zelensky, be impartial and also recognize Zelensky as an evildoer and call him names like they call Putin names? It would at least be correct in this way, as moreover it would also be correct that no weapons are supplied to Zelensky. If it had not been for the idiots of the West, and if they had not supplied weapons to Zelensky, the war would have ended in 16 days, instead of continuing now for the second year, and the warmonger Zelensky furthering America's ambition of hegemony, and playing right into its hands in its sick war mania, together with the Yanks themselves, who are secretly interfering in the war in various manner. This is what they are doing with regard to the fighting intrigues on the ground, as well as in the air, as I have seen with you, and also with Florina herself. And that with the arms deliveries to Zelensky, the idiots of the Western rulers and those stupid idiots from the nations, who still approve of everything, have started and are leading a world war with the whole thing, they have all not yet recognized in their stupidity. And the whole thing has really become a world war, through all the irresponsible and brain-sick people who can really only be called idiots, because they are devoid of all logic, reason, and responsibility, as well as all morality and ethics.
There is nothing but agreement with your words, but I must soon go again. Consequently, we must speak of what I have been instructed to tell you by gremium. So I will speak of it, though you are not to mention the whole thing in retrieving and writing down the report of the conversation.
Which is no problem, because I will just do my little dots.
That will be good, and so I have the following to explain.
That was not exactly a long speech, but it should be enough for Christian to finish it. But I want to tell you something else, and that is that it goes on here and there with us being spied on. But I am not talking about the earthlings who do it here and there, and then say with the rather lazy excuse that they are lost or lost their way, and believe that we would take this lie at face value. No, I do not want to talk about that, but about the fact that I was able to bring 3 witnesses here once on Monday, and let them see on the surveillance screen how we are being spied on, which is also done elsewhere by earthlings. This time it took a long time when an object whizzed around and registered everything Mark and Hartmut were working on. Of course they could not see the object because it remained invisible to their eyes, but the surveillance camera made it visible. When the witnesses, Bridget was still there, looked outside, they could not see anything of a spy object, but when they were back in front of the screen, they saw it again. Bridget then ran to get her camera, but before she could take a photo, the object disappeared again, so that only a faint glimmer could be captured on the camera. It is clear to us that this spying does not originate from earthlings. Moreover, these flying apparatuses cannot be of terrestrial origin, for earthlings cannot let devices whiz around silently and invisibly to the eyes. There are also no drives and also no propellers on the small objects, which move completely silently and whiz around in the air.
That's probably going to stay that way. We are assuming that they are trying to use that to make us...
Yes, that is a possibility. But I have 2 or 3 more questions, if you have time to answer them.
I'm sure there will be time enough for that.
Good. Then the question, because I was asked about it and I really do not know, which is how big are the biggest snakes with you on Era? Unfortunately, so far I have not been able to admire these creeping things on Era. Only here on Earth have I encountered such snakes. The biggest snake I ever saw was when I was with Svath once far back in the past. We saw such a huge thing, which was easily 23 meters long, which Svath could measure with a device. We also saw several turtles that were over 8 meters long, as well as a giant shark that Svath measured at about 22 meters long, if I remember correctly. We also saw huge rhinoceros-like mammals, which Svath said were probably the largest animals to ever walk the earth, but then died out due to lack of food. This was because at that time the climate had then changed, and those leafy trees and also other food that these animals had fed on disappeared.
We also have snakes on Era, even if you have not seen any yet. That you have dealt with these creeping creatures? I know from Simyase, because she told me that you once caught a black cobra that had taken up residence in the dormitory, which you then taxidermied and brought to Switzerland and gave to a friend because she was interested in it.
Yes, that's right. It was Heidi Naff. She worked as a telephonist at Zurich Station. Whenever I was in Switzerland, we met and exchanged our thoughts. When I finally returned to Switzerland in 1969, she found out that I was now living in Hinterschmidruti, so she found out my telephone number and phoned me. At that time, when I caught the cobra, I was for some time in the south of India, where I was with an earthly friend far away in the jungle at a river. After the first monsoon rains, the river suddenly had wild and torrential water, which destroyed our bamboo hut and swept it away together with my friend, and later I could only find her dead. After that, I went back to West Pakistan and Persia, to Turkey, and via Greece, Macedonia, Yugoslavia, and Austria back to Switzerland. During this time, however, Heidi had moved to Ticino, which I did not know.
Note Billy. On the 9th of May 1964, I wrote the poem in Mir Jave, Persia. For Nadia, whom I loved, I built a house by the river, but nature won and erased everything. The river swept away the shore, took all my possessions, love and dreams, they sank in the flood. By a deadly rain, the stream became a grave, for Nadia's short life a wet coffin. When my book of poems, 61 Years of Poems, was printed in 2003, the error quake unfortunately crept into the poem instead of rain.
I sent this poem to a man I met in Quetta, West Pakistan in Germany, and a song was made out of it without my knowledge. Manuela, whom I loved, which was then warbled by Freddie Quinn.
I did not know that.
But that should not bother you, because time has also healed a lot of wounds for me, because sometimes there were wounds that had to be healed. But what I really wanted to say is that the Earthly Council on Climate Change is stupidly proclaiming on one subject or another that it is not too late to stop climate change. That is the main message of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC in its synthesis report. So stupid and dumb are the so-called experts that they do not see and understand that climate change, which is man-made, can neither be stopped nor changed. What is possible is that the destruction of the planet and all ecosystems of nature, and therefore also of fauna and flora, can be minimized very slowly, that everything slowly begins to recover. But this can only happen very slowly by the Earthling finally realizing that he must massively reduce the overpopulation, which means that the massive overpopulation is reduced by a worldwide and long-term birth stop in such a way that one day the earthly population will fall below the number of 1 billion. Now, however, it is close to 10 billion, but this is disputed by false calculations of a humanity clock. This, as well as that the corona rampantly spreading disease is finally over, although new variants, that is to say mutations, appear again and again, as at present a new one arises, which is called Arcturus. And the fact that hundreds of thousands of people affected by the remove due to YT have to live a life of hardship and misery is not talked about, but is simply passed over in silence, because the governments do not want to take responsibility for it and shirk responsibility. This is despite the fact that various governments have propagated remove from YT, and some have collected horrendous sums of money for it.
What you say is correct, but your words will not be very successful. It will only be a minority that really thinks about everything. But now I really must go, for my duty calls me. Farewell and goodbye.
Yes, just the duties. Goodbye, Bermunda.